Hey guys, Yips here, coming with another video, and this one's going to be about gearing your Warlock in any scenario. So whether that be single target, whether it be multi-target in raid, or whether that be Mythic Plus, I'm going to cover it here today so you have a little bit of a better idea about how to be gearing your Warlock in those scenarios. So first, let's talk about single target in a raiding scenario. So for raid, a lot of people come in and ask me, like, Yips, what are your stats for single target? And I'm often really reluctant to show you guys my stats for single target, and that's just because it's not a good idea to copy someone else's stats. Often, your gear will determine your stats for your highest sim, rather than your stats determining your gear, because all stats are just so valuable on single target for Warlock. Often, just having a higher eye level piece with a little bit more intellect will kind of make it a better slot for you on single target. So don't kind of look at my stats and try to copy them. You should be simming yourself as your Warlock for single target and determining what gear is best for you. But in saying that, I will cover Legendaries as well as, some good stat lines for Warlock, even though I don't think it's a good idea to talk about. So for Warlock currently, if you are using tier 21 4-piece, the best legendary combinations are going to be either Hood Sifus, Hood Pride As, or Hood Belt. Any one of those three combinations will be really powerful with tier 21. It's up to you to determine which one is going to be best for you on which encounter. The safe choice is going to be Hood Pride As Pride As is just an excellent legendary for raid. It lets you soak more mechanics without dying. It's an excellent shield as well as gives you a ton of stats. Hood Belt is very good. Obviously, the extra shard gen is very powerful. And then Hood Sifus, the movement speed from Sifus is excellent, as well as the added effect where if you can land an interrupt or some sort of CC, you get a mini Bloodlust buff. So any one of these three combinations will work. You just determine which one's the best for you in any sort of raid scenario. I would recommend that most Warlocks probably run with Hood Pride As, and that would probably be the best setup if you do not have a good neck yet, just due to the fact of how many stats Pride As actually has. But yeah, just determine which one of those three combinations is best for you and go ahead and run that on whatever encounter. A lot of Warlocks see a lot of other players using Soul of the Netherlord in raid. I do not recommend it. Soul of the Netherlord is not that great of a legendary. Even though a lot of players use it on fights and parse okay with it, that does not mean that it is a good legendary to use. And the DPS loss from the stats cannot really be made up just by the execute effect. So I do not recommend using it on single target in almost any scenario. I highly recommend you use one of the three combinations that I kind of said here. Now, going a little bit away from tier 21, we'll talk slightly about tier 20. So if you're using tier 20 2-piece or tier 21 4-piece, a Netherlord ring does become slightly more powerful just due to the extra shard gen that you do have, as well as just the amount of haste buffs and things you can get. But regardless, if you do have the 2-piece, you can be using Pride As Belt, Pride As Sifus, Belt Sifus, or Belt Netherlord if you're using tier 20. But a lot of Warlocks, you should be using tier 21 over your tier 20 just due to the item level difference. With regards to stats, generally speaking, until your haste gets over 30%, haste is by far going to be the best stat for you. Even right now, haste is the best stat for me. You do want quite a bit of critical strike as well, just due to the fact of how strong perdition is, and then obviously mastery just buffs your dots. Pretty much no matter what, versatility is going to be your worst stat once you reach a certain item level. With regards to trinkets, Unstable Arcana Crystal, Norgan's Prowess, and a Crid are simply the best single target trinkets. If I had a better Crid, I would use it over the Unstable Arcana Crystal. So this is the kind of gear you want to be using on single target. Now let's talk about multi-dotting in a raid scenario. So fights like Coven, fight like dogs. On fights like that, Mastery is slightly more weighted. I do see a lot of Warlocks will run extremely high Mastery builds on bosses like that, and that's just because obviously you have less globals to press, so a lot more Mastery will obviously be benefiting your Absolute Corruption, but that doesn't mean stats like Haste and Crit don't have any value. Obviously, the more Mastery you get, the more value Haste and Crit obviously gain as well. So you're going to want to have a good balance of all stats, but generally speaking, if you are running an Absolute Corruption build, Mastery will be quite strong. Obviously, this will bring Sacrolash into the mix. So Sacrolash is obviously going to be a legendary that you want to use on these fights if you are running the Absolute Corruption build. So generally speaking, tuning your gear to have slightly more Mastery is not a bad thing, and then Sacrolash, Hood are probably the two legendaries you're going to be wanting to use on multi-dot scenarios when you are running the Absolute Corruption build. If you're choosing to run a multi-dot contagion build on 2-target cleaving, the best legendary setup for you is going to be the Helm and the Belt, and you do want a good mix of haste and crit for that as well, because you will be spending a lot of globals and you need your haste to be able to keep up with that. That being said, on any fight, haste is just a super good stat because it lets your gameplay flow more smoothly regardless. So, if you miss a global, the haste can kind of sometimes help you catch up and get that global back. So haste is never a bad stat. So don't stack too much mastery on multi-target situations. Haste and crit still do have quite a bit of value, but in saying that, obviously mastery can be very strong if you have, 7 or 8 absolute corruptions rolling at the same time. So that kind of covers rating as a whole. Generally speaking, those are the legendaries you're going to be using depending on the situation. Obviously, single target is the most flexible regarding Safuz and the helmet. It is worth saying that Safuz is by far the best legendary for Warlock if you're able to proc it. Even if you can only proc it once every minute, it's going to be the best legendary for you as a Warlock. So just keep that in mind when you're going for gear setups. The next thing I want to talk about is a little bit more of a touchy subject, and that's going to be Mythic Plus gearing. Now, Mythic Plus gearing is a lot less dependent on your item level and a lot more dependent on what sort of pieces you have, because a lot of the times you're going to be running an AoE build like this one with Sow the Seeds, and Sow the Seeds builds require a lot of haste. Not so much on 3 to 4 target with Sow the Seeding, but on much more targets like that, like 8 or 9 targets when you're really pulling quite large, haste has the largest effect on your DPS of Sow the Seeds. Often I do sim myself. The way I sim myself is I turn Bloodlust off. I sim for about 45 seconds to a minute, and I get my stat weights based off that on, 7 or 8 targets, or sometimes 5 or 6, just depending on the scenario, so I can get a good idea. And let me tell you guys, mastery is not good at all. Haste and crit are by far the best stats. Even versatility is better than mastery. So just keep that in mind when you're gearing yourself for multi-target dot scenarios and you're going to be running a Sow the Seeds build in Mythic Plus. So the best legendary for Mythic Plus by far is Safuz. You're able to proc it every 30 seconds. Like I had said previously, it is by far the best Affliction legendary if you're able to proc it. And having said that and saying that haste is the best stat for Sow the Seeds build, obviously Safuz is going to be the strongest legendary. I'm just going to show you guys my gear setup for Mythic Plus so you can get an idea of just how much haste I do run. I run 51% haste passively, okay? This is a lot of haste, okay? Most Warlocks probably won't be able to get to 51% passive haste without, unless you're super geared. Obviously, there's still some pieces that I could upgrade in my gear setup, but you see my item level does drop by 4, which is quite significant. I go from 972 to 968, but it's a sacrifice that I make to gain all of that haste as well as the critical strike, and you just can see how much my mastery drops going from a single target like build to this, and then going to an AoE build like this, okay? So the best legendaries for you in Mythic Plus is going to be Safuz plus the Master Harvester. Obviously, Pride's Helmet and Sacrolash Dark Strike are all very good on AoE scenarios as well. You can even use Soul of the Netherlord if you don't have another good ring with haste on it. All of those are really viable options, but by far the best ones are going to be Master Harvester and Safuz Secret. Just based, you have such high haste, you're putting out so many shards per minute on the target, as well as your shard gen just being so high in Mythic Plus, you're going to be proccing your Master Harvester all the time. And in big AoE scenarios, when you're doing 10 million DPS and you get a Master Harvester proc, that's just 2 million extra DPS that you're doing at that given time, right? So obviously it's super powerful when it comes to that. So I'm just going to show you guys some of my gear pieces here. I have a very heavily haste weighted neck piece with Mark of the Claw on it. I'm gemmed and enchanted haste on my cloak. I have haste gems on everything that I'm using. I'm using a 945 haste crit ring over even a 955 nod thumb or a 965 band of the Sargerite Smith. So all of my gear is very heavily weighted towards haste. Now, with regards to trinkets, I don't think the Terminus Signaling Beacon is that good. It's good at the start of the dungeon if you're doing a really big pull right away, like if you're pulling up to the boss in Maw of Souls or in Vault of the Wardens, something like that where you're pulling a lot of mobs very quickly and they'll die super fast. It can be a good trinket to put on for those situations, but you never really want to put on this trinket and have to wait the 30 seconds to be able to use it. You're probably just going to gain more value from something like Arcano Crystal. Prototype is an amazing AoE trinket, although you do have to be careful with it because of the 20-yard impact range, but overall it is very strong with the haste being the stat on it, as well as the damage that it deals is quite incredible. So yeah, make sure that if you're running a SO build, anytime you go to AoE, you're going to be running a gear setup that favors you towards haste on anything greater than 5 targets. Once you start getting to lower amounts of targets, like 3 or 4 targets, especially if they're spreading out a little bit and you have to start casting Unstable Affliction, I tend to shift more towards a Hood Suffuse Mastery build because your Soul Seeds damage is not super hindered in a build like this, and your dot damage is much higher. So when you get to less targets, this can be very powerful to switch to a build like this, but it is very important in every single scenario in Mythic Plus, you want almost as much haste as you can get because the pulls are so short and you have such little time to get your dots out that the more haste that you have just helps you get those agonies out quicker, helps you reach your maximum DPS faster, and get your shards out more quickly, okay? So those are the kind of things you want to be looking for in Mythic Plus in terms of gearing regarding trash DPS. Now, obviously for bosses, most of the time you're going to be using Pride as well as any sort of avoidance gear that you have. I have a gear set up here where I run Pride Suffuse, and I run, if I change these gloves, I run 20% avoidance as well. So you can see my stats are pretty good. I'm at 969 item level, and I'm running 20% avoidance. So you want to make sure that you get an avoidance set that does encompass Pride if you can do it, just to help survive some of the bosses that have really big AoE mechanics. That can be a really big help to your Mythic Plus pushing as well. So that kind of covers Mythic Plus in terms of the way that you want to gear for it. The last thing that I want to cover in this video is going to be relics for your weapon. So if you are a raider, the best relic that you can find is going to be one that has Perdition and Shadowy Incantations on it. Those are your two highest simming single target DPS and multi-target dotting traits in the game. Obviously, Agony is very good for multi-dotting as well, but in terms of, general usage, this is going to be the best kind of relic you can find. In my opinion, the best Netherlight Crucible relic that you can get, or trait that you can get, is the Mastery Avoidance trait. The Mastery... I think it's Mastery Avoidance trait. The Haste Speed one is also quite good as well. For Mythic Plus, if you are only a Mythic Plus Warlock, get Seeds of Doom trait. Getting that extra 30% seed damage is actually quite significant, and I'm probably going to be going for some Seed of Corruption traits if I can find them. Shadowing Incantations and Perdition are also very strong for Mythic Plus. So that's kind of how you want to be gearing your Warlock for almost any situations. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them. The one comment that I don't want people asking is about Soul of the Netherlord. It's not that good of a legendary anymore. Just take my word for it. Anyways, thanks for watching this video, guys. Thanks for hanging out. Hopefully you learned a little bit about how to gear your Warlock for whatever sort of scenario. Obviously, Simcraft is an amazing tool if you know how to use it. Maybe I'll be making a tutorial on how I sim myself for Mythic Plus, so you guys can have an idea of how to do that. Anyways, thanks for hanging out, guys, and I will see you guys later.